is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the 5th season. Whew, guys, these were, so Damaya's story is heartbreaking and had a quote in it that was like so compelling that I highlighted and sent it to Rashawn immediately, who responded with, well, goddamn, if that isn't everything. And what's going on with Syenite is so like far outside of what I understand that I don't even know where to begin with like my guesses on what's happening there. There's a lot happening. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. And, oh, good. Ashlyn is here. Ashlyn, everyone, is the commissioner for this show. So thank you, Ashlyn, for sponsoring this episode. And I'm going to address your email that you sent me, Ashlyn, if you are cool with that. So last week, some of you may remember that Ashlyn had asked me to revisit the interlude and asked me, like, what isn't mentioned. And I was like focusing on the fact that the obelisks are mentioned in the story, but are not mentioned in the interlude. But she meant not mentioned anywhere at all in the story. And so the sentence I was referring to was this. They notice what's there, stars and the sun and the occasional falling star. They do not notice what's missing. I reread that sentence a few times, and to me there's only one heavenly body that is not listed. And without that to stabilize the Earth's gravity, maybe we would see the type of seismic activity that is described in the book. I'm not sure how that would work, but it's a fascinating concept. Maybe NK was sitting around looking up at the night sky and just thought, what if there was no moon? How would humans and animals evolve without the moon? And then we get this awesome book. I might be way off, but I like the idea. Oh, Ashlyn, I'm seeing that you said chapters 11, 12, and 13 are just about 50 pages and a nice cross-section of the story. I went and did one chapter extra. I didn't even see that. I'm sorry. But, yeah, I didn't even notice the no moon thing. Didn't even enter my head. And that's a really interesting question because if there's no moon, there's also no tides, I would think. And I feel like that has to affect things as well, but I don't have enough of an understanding about that. You know, how that tides affect ecosystems and things to really know how that would change the way that the ecosystems of the ocean work. And does the moon, like, if it creates tides, then it has to affect the Earth's gravity quite a bit. But is it enough to cause a lot of instability to the point of like constant earthquakes if it's not there? These are all very interesting questions, and if there's anybody who is listening who knows more about this, please let me know, and I would be very interested to hear, as long as you're able to do that without spoiling me. So yeah, I don't know, like that. I have no doubt, Ashlyn, that you're right, that the moon is the thing, but I just don't know what that means, in the grander scheme of things. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that to start things off with, and put a little, little niggling idea in y'all's heads if you are reading along with us, to see if you guys come up with anything. So, chapter 11, Damaya at the fulcrum of it all. There's an order to life in the fulcrum. Waking comes with dawn. Since that's what Damaya always did back on the farm, this is easy for her. For the other grits, and that's what she is now, an unimportant bit of rock ready to be polished into usefulness, or at least to help grind others, better rocks. Waking comes when one of the instructors enters the dormitory and rings a painfully loud bell, which makes them all flinch, even if they're already awake. Everyone groans, including Damaya. She likes this. It makes her feel like she's part of something. They rise and make their beds, folding the top sheets military style. Then they shuffle into the showers, which are white with electric lights and shining with tile, which smell of herbal cleaners because the Fulcrum hires strongbacks and comless from the Yemenese shanty towns to come and clean them. For this and other reasons, the showers are wonderful. She's never been able to use hot water every day like this. Tons of it just falling from holes in the ceiling like the most perfect rain ever. She tries not to be obvious about it because some of the other grits are equatorials and would laugh at her, the bumpkin, overwhelmed by the novelty of easy, comfortable cleanliness. But, well, she is. So that's how this chapter starts off, is basically a description of how everything functions. It's a very military style system where you have to make your bed perfectly. You have to wear your uniform perfectly. Everything has to be pressed and well maintained and clean, and your hair has to be combed and, cut short if it's uncombed as a punishment. If you do this more than once, then you are shaved bald. Unbrushed teeth merit mouthwash with soap. Incorrect dress is corrected with 5 switches across the naked buttocks or back. Incorrect bed making with 10. The switches do not break the skin. Instructors are trained to strike just enough, but they do leave welts, which are probably meant to chafe underneath the stiff fabric of the uniforms. Now here comes the quote that I sent to Rashawn. You are representatives of us all, the instructors say, if any grit dares to protest this treatment. When you're dirty, all origines are dirty. When you're lazy, we're all lazy. We hurt you, so you'll do the rest of us no harm. Yo. That is some respectability politics anthem shit right there. And most of you listening probably are familiar with the concept of respectability politics, and it can apply to a lot of different communities. It's certainly a thing with women where, we have this comforting and completely incorrect idea that is ingrained in patriarchy that tells us if we behave well and guard the way we dress and talk, that we will be safe from the aggressions of men, which of course is garbage and does not make any sense. But we think that because it makes us feel better, I think, in some ways initially. And then, men who like to control women really sort of try and nail that into our psyches, that we are responsible for the things that happen to us by merit of how we dress and handle ourselves. For the Black community, from what I understand, and this is I want to add that caveat, whenever I am trying to link what's being told to us through this story with what the Black community experiences, of course, I am not Black. And so I am relaying all of this from my understanding from reading and listening to Black women primarily. But there is a real, you represent your entire race thing that goes on with Black people in a way that does not happen with white people. And you can see that in so many ways that we handle things when it comes to white folks. Like if a white person does a mass shooting, it's always that it was like a lone wolf, and it was a one person who, he had mental issues and he had this one specific situation of bullying that made him in particular a bad egg. But it's never ever suggested that all white people are like this, even though like most of these kinds of shootings are by white people. The evidence stacks up, and yet it still doesn't. We are not worried when we leave the house about representing our race if we are white. We are not worried about, well, are they going to think that all white people are sloppy and lazy if we behave in a certain way? And Black people are much more aware that if something happens and it is a Black person who did it, that their entire community at large is going to be blamed for it. And that it will be further evidence to racists that all Black people act in a certain way. Even though that doesn't make any fucking sense, because people are people no matter what. They're all going to be different. But that is how they are seen, as like a monolith. And so there is a feeling of how a good Black person behaves, a respectable Black person, versus Black folks that are an embarrassment and embody stereotypes that they are trying to leave behind as a race, and that they are like betraying their own in doing that. And it's a really toxic, awful thing because it's so understandable why Black people try to cope with the unjust world around them with that kind of thinking. It's exactly the same situation as with women, where we try to act like we have some control over the fact that other people hate us for no reason. But it's not true, and it doesn't actually help in the long term. It may individually help a person if they behave in a certain way, like to a degree, if they are dressed a certain way. But when it comes right down to it, you are still Black. And so your word, if it comes up against a white person, is still going to count for less, no matter how you're dressed. And this is the same thing for a woman. You may be a very modest woman who is following all the rules that society tells her to follow, but if she is raped and she accuses a respectable man, her word will always be worth less every time. It does not matter how she is dressed. That's just how it works. And so this like one paragraph, just there is so much in there. It's such a short little couple sentences, and it's just a lot. It's a lot. So, yeah, once Damaya would have protested the unfairness of such judgments. The children of the Fulcrum are all different shapes, ages, colors. Some speak Sansamat with different accents, having originated from different parts of the world. One girl has sharp teeth because it's her race's custom to file them. Another boy has no penis, though he stuffs a sock into his underwear after every shower. Another girl has rarely had regular meals and wolfs down every one like she's still starving. One cannot reasonably expect sameness out of so much difference, and it makes no sense for Damaya to be judged by the behavior of children who share nothing save the curse of origine with her. Origine? I'm going to go origine. But Damaya understands now that the world is not fair. They are origines, the misalems of the world, born cursed and terrible. This is what is necessary to make them safe. Anyway, if she does what she's supposed to do, no unexpected things happen. Her bed is always perfect, her teeth clean and white. When she starts to forget what matters, she looks at her right hand, which twinges now and again on cold days, though the bones healed within a few weeks. She remembers the pain and lesson that it taught. Oh, brother, guys. She's buying into the whole thing. And she really thinks it's going to make them all safer. And again, like I said, in the short term it may, but really when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter. But it's really hard to read. It's just having a child in this situation is a smart move because it really gives you the experience of being indoctrinated with this garbage from a young age. So then she starts to talk about the crucible, which that is what they call the different courts, where they are taught classes. And all of the classes are sort of handled differently. There are like oral exams. At times there are, different punishments dealt to people who don't handle the questions well or don't answer correctly. And there are Damaya's answer to this question. Stonelore advises, watch for the center of the circle. Where is the fallacy in this statement? That is the question that lands on Damaya one day, so she stands to answer. The statement explains how one may estimate the location of an origin by map. It is incorrect, oversimplified, because an origin's region of consumption is not circular, it is toroidal. Many people then fail to understand that the zone of effect extends downward or upward as well and can be deformed in other three-dimensional ways by a skilled origin. Instructor Marcasite nods approval for this explanation, which makes Damaya feel proud. She likes being right. Marcasite continues, and since Stonelore would be harder to remember if it was full of phrases like, watch for the inverted fulcrum of a conical torus, we get centers and circles. Accuracy is sacrificed in the name of better poetry. So all of this is seems to be going pretty well. She is doing really well in all of her classes. She's making her teachers happy. She's like a model student pretty much. And Damaya is like, the only thing that sort of makes you think for a second it's not going as well as you think is that she sits alone at lunch. but she realizes that all, like, she's far from alone. It's not everybody sitting gathered up in groups except for her. A lot of the other Origines sit alone as well. And there's a certain feeling of just not being part of the whole thing that she starts to, like, recognize. A certain furtiveness of movement, a hesitancy, a tension around the eyes and jawline. Some of them bear the marks of their old lives in a more obvious way. There is a gray-haired Western coaster boy who's missing an arm above the elbow, though he's deft enough at managing without it. A Sanzed girl, maybe 5 years older, has the twisting seams of old burn scars all down one side of her face. There is another Grit even newer than Damaya, whose left hand is in a special leather binding like a glove without fingers, which fastens around the wrist. Damaya recognizes this binding because she wore it herself while her hand healed. They do not look at each other much, she and these others who sit off to themselves. After lunch, the Grits travel through the ring garden in long, silent lines, overseen by the instructors so that they will not talk or stare too obviously at the adult Origines. Damaya does stare, of course, because they're supposed to. It's important that they see what awaits them once they begin earning rings. The garden is a wonder, as are the Origines themselves, adult and elderly of every conformation, all healthy and beautiful and confident, which makes them beautiful. All are starkly forbidden in their black uniforms and polished boots. Their ringed fingers flick and flash as they gesture freely, or turn the pages of books they don't have to read, or brush back a lover's curling hair from one ear. What Damaya sees in them is something she does not understand at first, though she wants it with a desperation that surprises and unnerves her. As those first weeks pass into months and she grows familiar with the routine, she begins to understand what it is the older Origines display. Control. They have mastered their power. No ringed Origine would ice the courtyard just because some boy shoved her. None of these sleek, black-clad professionals would bat so much as an eyelash at either a strong earthshake or a family's rejection. They know what they are, and they have accepted all that means, and they fear nothing. Not the Stills, not themselves, not even Old Man Earth. If to achieve this, Damaya must endure a few broken bones, or a few years in a place where no one loves or even likes her, that is a small price to pay. Which, like, is a really interesting thing, because she's seeing all of this from the outside as a child, and really believes it, but, like, we've been with Syenite, and we know that these are not people who are, like, satisfied with their lives, that these are not people who aren't mistreated anymore, you know, like, it's just a really interesting, it's the beautiful, like, simplicity of seeing things as a kid and how everything is so black and white still. And you just really believe that's how the world is. There are good and bad things, and I want the good things, the end. So there's a lot of, like, you know, sort of whispering among the students about how if you aren't good enough in your classes, the instructors ice you. And there is a sentence, it will be many years before Damaya understands that when the instructors kill an errant student, it is meant not as a goad, but as a mercy. Yikes. So 6 months pass. And finally, this boy comes and talks to her at lunch. He tells her that his name is Arquette, and she tells him that's not his name. He says, it's the name my parents gave me, and I intend to keep it until they find a way to take it away from me. But I'm officially called Mexiques, the highest quality grade of aquamarine, used almost exclusively for art. It suits him. He's a handsome boy, despite his obvious Arctic or Antarctic heritage, and that makes him dangerous in the sharp-faceted way that handsome big boys have always been. She decides to call him Mexique because of this. So Mexiques is chatting her up, and he's somewhat charming, talking about how she's, like, way too confident and doesn't seem to, like, struggle and stammer and blush when she's talking to him, and that she has to pretend that she doesn't like him, to which she says, well, I don't like you. And they seem to have, like, a pretty friendly conversation about, like, stone lore and how they grew up and what kind of stories they heard and whether or not they were, like, educated in this sort of thing. And when she like, there's this moment, I hope the pop lorists don't go away. I like them, even if their stories are a little stupid and predictable. Of course, their stories are set in real creches, not places like this. Damaya knows full well what he means, but she wants to know if he'll say. Places like this? Oh, you know, beautiful, wonderful, perfect places of love and light. And when she laughs, he says, it took me a while to laugh after I got here. And it's a really, like, it's a sad moment in retrospect, because the way that they get along here seems like the beginning of something. And then it turns out to be, it is the beginning of, I'm not sure why Maxix comes up to her the way that he does in order to feel her out. But what winds up happening is that people begin to target her so that she is getting in trouble with all of the superiors. So somebody like bumps her in the showers really hard. And it's just like the first time that, you know, anybody has ever like bumped into her that way, to so hard that she like drops her washcloth. When she gets out of the shower, her shoes are missing. And of course the teacher like blames her, says that she has misplaced them, and she winds up getting like swatted on the soles of her feet. And they give her new shoes, but like still. And then at dinner, somebody spikes her drink with alcohol and gets her drunk, and like being an origine and drinking when you don't have control yet is incredibly dangerous and super, super not allowed. And so she just keeps on getting targeted in all of these different ways. It's more than pranks, you know, somebody's trying to fuck up her time here. And let's see, it doesn't matter why the other grits have decided to bully her. All that matters is that they're doing it, and that these are no harmless pranks. I wasn't saying that because she had said it, but there it is. They're trying to get her iced. Galena's right. Damaya's got to deal with this now. So she goes to an origine named Selu, but who the other grits call Crack because they think it's funny. And she even answers to that name since she can't seem to stop them from using it. So she goes and sits down, and Crack's immediate response is, "Really? Things are bad enough that you need me?" It's a good sign that they can be honest with each other right off. "Yes," Damaya says. "They're messing with you too, aren't they?" Crack sighs. This makes the room reverberate faintly, or so it feels for an instant. Damaya makes herself not react, because a good partnership should not begin with a display of fear. Crack sees this and relaxes just a little. So they cook up this plan together that they are going to hide her shoes in somebody's trunk to frame them. And this is going to serve two purposes. One, it will be obvious then that somebody stole her shoes the first time and she was not responsible for that. It will get the person in trouble for stealing because she's planning to put them in the trunk of someone that she's pretty sure did the stealing to begin with. And thirdly, it will reveal if that person did not do the stealing, who did, more than likely, because she is pretty positive that Maxix knows who did it, even if he didn't. So what they do is hide her shoes, and then Carnelian, who is one of the instructors, comes in and immediately is like, "Someone stole your shoes again? Do you have proof?" And she says, "Well, check their trunks, because I'm pretty sure that, you know, they didn't have enough time to get rid of them, so they'll still be here." And they go through the trunks and they find them in Maxix. And Maxix sees his expression change and immediately looks at Jasper. So that tells her that last time Jasper stole them, and that Maxix knows that Jasper stole them, and thinks again that Jasper stole them this time and is hiding them in Maxix's trunk, either to frame him, but more likely just to store them, and that it has inadvertently gotten Maxix in huge trouble because Jasper didn't expect for them to search the trunks at all. And then comes this awful thing. Awful fucking thing. He asks Maxix, do you have anything to say for yourself? And he says, Jasper took her shoes the last time. Jasper starts to say, no, I didn't. He's just trying to pass this off on someone else. But then he says, she sold them for me, traded them to one of the cleaning comless in exchange for liquor. And he points at Crack. And Crack loses her shit and says, you let that old pervert feel you up for liquor and a letter. You know full well he wouldn't give it to us just for shoes. It was from my mother. Jasper's definitely crying now. I didn't want him to, but I couldn't. They wouldn't let me write to her. You liked it, Crack sneers. I told you I'd tell if you said anything, didn't I? Well, I saw you. He had his fingers in you, and you moaned like it felt good. Just like the little wannabe breeder you are, only breeders have standards. Oh my God, you guys. I was not ready for any of this at all. And Jasper is sobbing, and it's just like the worst. Like, the whole thing is so awful. Like, Jasper is tormenting Damaya, but also being molested, but also like letting this other girl be whipped and stuff. So it's like I just go around and around with all of the many levels of like of pain that they are inflicting on each other. It's just there's too much. I told you not to tell. He's sobbing openly now. His mouth works, but nothing more comes out that's intelligible. Nothing but a low, despairing moan. And finally, Carnelian, like, gets Maxix, Jasper, and Crack out of there. And eventually, I think, let's see. Damaya stares back because she's too stunned to look away. This is Crack. This is what comes of trusting others. Crack was not her friend, was not even someone she liked, but she thought they could at least help each other. Now she's found the head of the snake that's been trying to eat her, and it's halfway down the gullet of a completely different snake. The result is too obscene to look at, let alone kill. Better you than me, Crack says softly. No one says a word. No one even breathes loudly. That was the idea. One more slip-up, and I'm done for. But you're a little citizen perfect. Top scores on all the tests, perfect control and applied, not a wrinkle out of place. The instructors wouldn't really do much to you. Not yet. And while they were trying to figure out how their star pupil suddenly went wrong, everyone would stop waiting for me to blow up a mountain, or trying to make me do it, for a while anyway. That was the idea. Which, yikes, like just, again, so many layers to like what's happening here. So finally, they are all like removed from the room, and Damaya just starts to put her shoes on and try and act normal. And one of the kids comes up to her and apologizes and says, I'm the one who pushed you in the shower. I'm sorry about that. Jasper does not return, but Carnelian tells them he's been sent to the satellite Fulcrum up in the Arctic, since the Fulcrum of Eumenes holds too many bad memories for him. This was meant as a kindness, perhaps, but Damaya knows an exile when she sees one. A few days later, Maxix returns with broken hands and haunted eyes, and he never speaks to Damaya again. It could be worse, though. No one ever sees or mentions Crack again. Yikes. So Crack's dead, or maybe been made into, like, one of the nodes, but, like, either way, it would be better if she was dead than that, so I don't even want to think about that. So then we get Fungus Season, which is a long, how like every chapter ends with a sort of like bit of a poem or a quote or something. This is actually a really long one that takes up a full page about the way that one of the seasons created perfect conditions for a fungal bloom that spread across everything and killed all of the crops. And it took 2 full years for the fungus to sort of run its course, and then a 2-year process for everything to return to normal and the ground to recover and for people to be able to plant again. So even though the season itself was only 6 months and wasn't as bad, that 4 years following up made the season so much longer. And it's just a nice illustration of how the seasons don't have to be that long to wreak complete havoc on everything and, cause thousands and thousands of deaths, probably from famine, because everything is dying. So, all right, let's go to chapter 12. Syenite finds a new toy. Fucking Syenite, man, she has had it. SAL, the woman who is in charge that they met when they first got to this community, to Allia, she is so smug about the fact that Alabaster is sick. And I was expecting a little bit of panic when she found out that he hadn't actually died. But no, she isn't she's not panicked. She doesn't seem sheepish in any way. She's very, very smug about it. And this basically pushes Syenite right over the edge because she had intended to handle this one way. But when she sees this woman being as insufferable as she is, she starts to get really pushy about it. And it's the governor was supposed to be here. You told us that you were going to get him and now he's not. And it wasn't a request. Also, I can continue the work without Alabaster. And when Asael says something about, I don't see why we should pay for two when if we're only getting one, Syenite is just kind of I don't care. Pay them you talk to them about it. That's not my issue. I'm here to do a job. And when she says the biggest difference between him and me is that I'm the one who needs to see what she's doing, it's sort of hammers home that I can still do this job, but you just brought down the person who would do the better job and make this all go easier. So wow, good job screwing yourself, you dummy. Syenite decides it's time she asks some questions of her own. And this is when she brings up the governor. Do you have a telegraph here? I'd like to send a message to the Fulcrum and let them know we'll be delayed. Delayed? Well, yes. How long do you think it will be before the governor is able to meet with us? The Fulcrum will want to know. I thought you were more reasonable than your colleague. You're actually going to walk out of here and not clear our harbor in a fit of pique. It isn't a fit of pique. Now Cyan's mad for real. Now she gets it. She looks down at Asael, who sits there smug and secure in her big chair behind her big desk, and it's an actual fight to keep her fists from clenching, her jaw muscles from flexing. Would you tolerate this treatment in our position? Of course I would. Asael straightens, surprised into an actual reaction for once. The governor has no time for... No, you wouldn't tolerate it. Because if you were in my position, you'd be the representative of an independent and powerful organization, not some 2 quarts backwater flunky. You would expect to be treated like a skilled expert who's been learning her craft since childhood, like someone who plies an important and difficult trade, and who comes to perform a task that dictates your calm's livelihood. And yet... You haven't shaken our hands, SAL leader. You didn't look us in the eye when we first met. You still haven't offered that cup of safe that Alabaster suggested yesterday. Would you do that to a decreed mess from the 7th University? Would you do it to a master engineer come to repair the comms hydro? Would you do it to a representative of the Strongbacks Union for your own comm? Finally, SAL says, I see. Maybe you do. Well, what do you want, an apology? Then I apologize. You must remember, though, that most normal people have never seen an orogene, let alone how to do business with one, and isn't it understandable that we might be uncomfortable? Discomfort is understandable. It's the rudeness that isn't, and that's a really shitty apology. I'm sorry you're so abnormal that I can't manage to treat you like a human being. You're a raga, Asael snaps, and then has the gall to look surprised at herself. Well, Syenite makes herself smile. At least that's out in the open. Oh, man, this whole thing. So the only thing that finally pushes her to try and go and find the governor and get things rolling the way they're supposed to is Syenite basically being well, we'll make this, we'll draw this out as long as we need to, and we have a really nice hotel to stay in while we do. And the reminder that SAL may have to pay for their stay out of her own pay because she didn't get things settled properly. So Asael finally gets up and brings back an elderly, portly woman and at first, Syenite's kind of irritated because she knows the governor's a man. So the instant that she sees this woman, she's like, okay, they're still not going to introduce me to the governor. This is really fucking frustrating. But this woman is actually very courteous and kind of like cutting in that very passive aggressive way that people have when it comes to bureaucracy. And I really enjoy how much Syenite like changes her estimations of this woman as her sentences continue, because she keeps saying things that are just like low-key shade about SAL, and just sort of like acknowledging that, you know, we depend on you. And the whole thing is, she even like says SAL would be happy to provide a tour of the city, for example, if there's anything else you need. And Syenite kind of is like, oh God, that would be great, because I know she would hate that and it would be super humiliating, but no, I will not do that. And the whole thing, I just really enjoy this. Her name is Harrismith, which is kind of a weird name. I don't know if it's Heresmith or Harrismith. I'm going to go with Heresmith just because it's a little easier to say. You're coming with us? Well, our com's livelihood is dependent on you, after all. It seems only proper. Oh yeah, this one's a keeper. Then please proceed, Heresmith leader. Syenite gestures toward the door, and they all head out. The harbor's wrong. They're standing on a kind of boardwalk along the western curve of the harbor's half-circle. From there, most of Allia can be seen, spreading up the caldera slopes that surround the waterfront. So, at this point, Syenite can tell that there is something happening under the harbor here that doesn't make any sense. And what I find really, really interesting about this is the fact that it turns out, in the end, to be an obelisk. But the obelisk is not fucking like something that she can sense the way that she can sense other stone. And that is so unexpected. Totally, like, the whole thing is so full of surprises for me. The rock beneath the raised layers of silt and sand, she can't feel it. She should be able to, if it's pushing up the sea floor like this. She can feel the weight of the water atop it and the rock deformed by its weight and pressure underneath, and the strata around it, but not the actual obstruction itself. There might as well be a big empty hole in the bottom of the harbor around which the entire harbor floor has shaped itself. So yeah, just so I assumed that an Origin would be able to deal with one of these obelisks, because the obelisks are made out of stone. Hello. But it doesn't appear to be. And so she starts to warn them about the whole thing. Like, they're basically like, well, can you get it out? And she's like, I can get it out, but we don't know what it is. And it could cause all sorts of problems. Like, there might be like, it might be the remains of something that was attached to explosives. It might be like, and she says something about, you know, it might be a deposit of oil that'll pollute your harbor, but she knows it's not oil because she'd be able to sense that as well. And then she's like, but if I don't move it, the coral is definitely going to regrow, because the like level of the harbor floor has been raised by this object. So you're going to have to get this all done again in at least a century. And I think Heresmith says that they'll still be paying off the Fulcrum in a century, which I'm just like, God damn, that is a lot of debt. So she's trying to be as like forthright as she can with them. And fucking Allia, is that her name? I forgot already. She is sort of, or SAL, that's it. SAL tries to insinuate that maybe Syenite isn't trying to fix it because she's just trying to screw them. To which Syenite is like, why would I do that? I wouldn't tell you guys any of this. I would just let you pay for me to remove all of that coral and then watch you have to pay for it all again in 100 years, and I wouldn't care. To which everybody's just kind of like, yeah, I guess that's true. So finally they tell her, like, they're like, yeah, you know what, just go ahead with it. And she gets so irritated at the way that everybody's talking to her, and the way that SAL says something like, well, maybe you can't do it, you know, like just kind of goading her, that she decides, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to do it then. She even suggests, Syenite does, that they move the city, like get up and move and rebuild somewhere else. And here Smith is like, yeah, that's like, just simply not an option that's on the table. We have built so much infrastructure here that moving, there's just no way. So Syen reaches down and uses her magic, and I'm calling it that, this power in a way that she hasn't before, that there's a feeling of her having linked up with something again, the way that she did when she was linked up with Alabaster. Suddenly she's not in the earth anymore. Something pulls her away and over and down and in. And all at once she is lost, flailing about in space like a black constricting, in the space of a black constricting cold. And the power that flows into her is not heat or motion or potential, but something entirely else. Something like what she felt last night when Alabaster commandeered her originy. But this isn't Alabaster. And she's still in control, sort of. That is, she can't stop what's happening. So the thing comes up, and it turns out that it is a fucking... Because she had intended to just push it out of the harbor. Like, not lift it up into the air and do this big dramatic thing, but to just shove it into deeper water so that it won't be blocking the channel. But it gets to a point where whatever it is begins to move on its own. And she's like really flipping out, and kind of lets go of the power and realizes that everything is sort of shaking. And there's a siren going off to alert, about earthquakes and everything. And there, rising slowly from the water and shedding the remnants of its earthen shell as it begins to hum and turn, is an obelisk. It's different from the one Syen saw last night. That one, the purple one, is still a few miles off the coast, though she doesn't look that way to confirm its presence. The one before her dominates all her vision, all her thought, because it's rusting huge, and it's not even completely out of the water yet. Its color is the deep red of garnets, its shape a hexagonal column with a sharp-pointed irregular tip. It is completely solid, not shimmering or flickering in the half-real way of most obelisks. It is wider than several ships put end to end, and of course it is long enough as it continues to rise and turn to nearly block off the whole harbor, a mile from tip to tip. But something's wrong with it. So there comes a point about halfway through where there's tons of cracks in it, and that there's like black like contaminants that have like gotten into the cracks there, sort of making this like weird like black spider web through the crystal. And then she sees inside that there is a person fucking frozen in there with its mouth open as if it's screaming. And she can tell that this is a stone eater, and that it's dead. And that is the end of that chapter. You know what? I'm realizing that I might not have read chapter 14, but yeah, that's it. I don't know what to make of that, because, I had been theorizing last time that the stone eaters came from inside the obelisks. Like that's what they were born from. And this feels like it maybe like might support that idea, except that it's a full grown one that's dead. So are they enemies somehow? Like, I don't know what could have happened here. Or is it a prison? Is it, I don't know, guys. So chapter 13 is Essun. And Essun found out that the name of their new calmless woman pal is called Tonki. And Tonki is, like, obviously, she says something about how she's following them because of Hoa and how interesting he is. And she says, if I didn't try to figure him out, my old masters at the uni would hire assassins to hunt me down. Not that they haven't done that already. And she's saying all of like taking samples of his blood and everything. And Hoa is like not a big fan of this talk and tries to walk so that she is between, that you are between the two of them, because obviously he feels like she's not to be trusted. And it turns out that Tonki lives in a cave and is aware that she stinks and that she's got like mold in her hair because she bathes immediately upon getting home. And it turns out that Tonki, I really like this. Tonki has a penis, but Essun continues to call her she, uses female pronouns, because apparently that is what Tonki wants. And I appreciate that despite the penis, Essun is just like, whatever, it's still a she, I don't care. Like, hey, that's nice. Thanks, Essun, for, addressing her the way that she wants to be addressed. That's a nice little bit of progress here. And it's helpful once she bathes that she is not so reeking so badly that you can't breathe anymore. So the whole place actually becomes rather cozy afterwards. The next day you resume the journey south with Tonki, the calmless geomist, and Hoa, the whatever he is. Because you're pretty sure by now he's not human. That doesn't bother you. Officially speaking, you're not human either. What does bother you is that Hoa won't talk about it. You ask about what he did to the Kirkusa, and he refuses to answer. You ask him why he won't answer, and he just looks miserable and says, because I want you to like me. It almost makes you feel normal traveling with these two. The road demands most of your attention in any case. The ashfall only gets heavier over the next few days until you finally do pull the masks out of your runny sack and hand them around. It's clumpy ash for now, not the floating haze of death that stone lore warns about, but no sense being incautious. So everybody's walking around with these masks on, with ash all over the landscape, ash all over their faces and hair and clothes, so that everybody looks pretty much the same, which is kind of a refreshing change because you had been stared at so much earlier that the fact that nobody notices you being different than everyone else is kind of a welcome change. And the fact that this ash is kind of getting thicker and harder to deal with makes people head back to all of their communities and means that they're finding places to settle and hide. So all of the crowds on the road are thinning out a lot more. And eventually there is a roadhouse where there are 5 women and 1 man. And they are all wearing bits of clothing that tell of the fact that they used to come from money, that they're from the equatorial area. And at first you're like, well, they don't serve anything but as a decoration. But then you realize that it serves for them to know whether you are of their class and to signal to other people whether they are of their class as well. The impractical cloth has one very practical use. It is the marker of a new tribe in the process of being born, a tribe to which you do not belong. Not a problem. Yet. So they tell her about, there's a couple of women who are really, really beautiful, and one of them is talking about going to a concert, and we saw something sort of tear off to the north along the horizon. We could see this red light flare up at one point, and then it spread off to the east and west. I couldn't tell how far away, but we could see it reflected in the underside of the clouds. It spread fast. We were just standing in the street watching it grow and trying to figure out what we were seeing and sussing when the ground started to shake. Then a cloud obscured the red, and we realized it was coming towards us. So Essun is theorizing about this and figures that it's an ash storm. And that they probably, they would have been dead if this had gone any differently, but that an origin probably saved this girl. And they do mention that there is a node nearby. So she's like, oh, okay, yeah. The ash that followed, no one could breathe. The ash was getting in people's mouths, into their lungs, turning into cement. I tied my blouse around my face. It was made of the same stuff as a mask. That's the only thing that saved me. Us. And I just thought that this was really interesting. Even though you would think that everybody being, in the same boat, so to speak, with all of this ash in the air and things being destroyed, that it would be the great equalizer. But it's still not. The fact that she is wearing fabric that could save her life is right there. A whole difference in how people are going to deal with this depending on the class that they're in. And then the fact that they're continuing to wear this stuff to signal to each other means they're very much clinging to their class even after this disaster, which is just, it's so pointless, whatever. So we ran and we haven't stopped. So that's the only information that you really get about what went down with all and caused all of this. So All that really concerned you is keeping your canteen filled and your food stores topped up and replacing your shoes when they start to wear thin. Doing all this is easy, for now, because people are still hoping this will be a brief season. A year without a summer or 2, or 3. That's how most seasons go. But you know better. This season will be much, much longer than anyone could have planned for. But that won't stop you from taking advantage of their misconception. So that sucks. Ugh. I mean, these seasons sound like the pits anyway, but like, and you know, a year or 2 or 3, like that's quite bad enough. But way longer than that, man, that fucking blows. So let's see, here it is. This is the thing that I liked the way that this was described. Some comms, the prices are beginning to go strange. One will take currency, and you use up nearly all of yours buying Hoa his own bedroll. The next won't take currency at all, but they will take useful tools, and you've got one of Gija's old napping hammers at the bottom of your bag. That buys a couple weeks' worth of quiche bread and 3 jars of sweet nut paste. You share the food out among the 3 of you because that's important. Stonelore's full of admonitions against hoarding within a group, and you are a group by now, whether you want to admit it or not. Hoa doesn't sleep much or eat anything, but after a while, you try not to notice that, the same way you try not to think about him turning a kirkusa into stone. And Tonki is just sort of like, just trying to be as low-key as possible. She doesn't like going near communities. And it's definitely like less about the, what do you call it? It's not like a self-consciousness thing. There's a real vibe that like she's avoiding somebody. And she did say that her college probably sent out assassins to kill her. So, you know, that might be a factor. The woman doing the comms trading has you over a barrel, and she knows it. So you only get 2 pairs of boots. One for you and another for Hoa, since his are already starting to look worn. Tonki, who has her own spare boots dangling from her pack, dismisses the price when you complain about it. There are other ways to find our way, she says, and then stares at you in a way that makes you uneasy. You don't think she knows you're a Raga, but who can really say with her? Yeah, I kind of feel like she does. And I thought that last time, but I, again, didn't have any evidence for it. And now with what happened with Hoa, I'm like, she does, right? She has to. There's something about it. And there's also the boy is your savior. The whole thing is that he can sense Essun, and the fact that he is able to give Essun some guidance. I mean, she'd not know where the fuck to head, you know? She could be walking in any direction and have no idea if she's going toward, and there's the hope that maybe this ash could like slow them down and make it so that it's going to be easier to catch up. But yeah, the whole thing is like kind of a godsend that he's able to find the way. At one point, Hoa takes you down a calm road that cuts between imperial segments and probably saves you a lot of time, especially if Gija just stayed on the main roads the whole way. And there are some comms that are ready to fire on you as you pass by, which, you know, is only to be expected, I guess, at this point. Like, people are going to start to get really defensive. He can only, when you ask, he says he knows the direction, but he cannot sense the specific route. As the weeks pass, he begins to have trouble with even that. You stand with Hoa at one crossroads for a full 5 minutes while he chews his lip until finally you ask him what's wrong. There are a lot of you in one place now, he says uneasily, and you change the subject quickly, because if Tonki doesn't know what you are, then she will after a conversation like that. And she doesn't really, Essun doesn't understand what he could mean. Like, I assumed, of course, that it's Origines, but she's saying the Fulcrum died with Eumenes, and that there are satellite Fulcrums, but we're months away from them. I was like, are you sure it died? Like, why wouldn't... And I think we know, right, that, like, they're positioned in exactly a place where they wouldn't be taken down by it. I guess she just doesn't know that. So, finally, they find a path, and he says it's nearby. The place with all the origines. I can't find anything past them. They're like little lights. It's easy to see just one by itself, but together they make one very bright light, and she passed close to it or through it. Now I can't. And Essun says, Cess? And he says, no, that isn't what I do. I can't know anything else. The bright light keeps me from focusing on any little light. How many are there? I can't tell. More than one. Less than a town, but more are heading there. How do you know to go there? I don't know. Well, that's helpful. So yeah, I just like the whole way that this goes. I don't know what to think because I assumed that the Fulcrum was still standing. I still think that's, we have Damaya's POV in the Fulcrum, and I'm assuming that these are timelines that are like sitting next to each other. So I don't know, like, because he's saying not a whole town, and I would assume the Fulcrum would seem like a whole town. But I don't know. And then, there's the theory that she has that maybe someone's trying to rebuild the Fulcrum. But, if it weren't for the fact that Jija is not an origin and that Jija is the one that like took Essun away, I would think that there's some sort of beacon that's drawing all the origins toward it. But Jija is a regular person who apparently, and we don't know this, we didn't actually see it, but it seems to be that Jija has taken the daughter and run because of the horror of her winding up being an origin. So I don't know. Or maybe he was heading towards the Fulcrum because he didn't know that it had broken down, like, and is still heading there because he's not aware, or I don't know. And then this ends with, judge all by their usefulness, the leaders and the hardy, the fecund and the crafty, the wise and the deadly, and a few strong backs to guard them all. So that's the end of chapter 13. And yeah, I didn't read 14. I thought I had, but once I got to this point, I realized like, oh, no. That's all chapter 12. So I wound up following your instructions, Ashlyn, without even realizing it. So that's good. But yeah, I don't know what to make of this whole thing. And I don't know because, like, of course, as soon as she sees it, Syenite knows a stone eater. But apparently, Essun doesn't know what a stone eater is. Like, or I feel like that would have occurred to her by now. So I don't know if that's something that you learn if you are at the Fulcrum, if you're an origin that's in training, that you are told what stone eaters are. But apparently, like, Essun doesn't know what they are at all. So, yeah. So yeah, this was a really interesting couple of chapters, and Damaya, God, I really feel for that girl. But this is a good section. So thank you, Ashlyn, very much for commissioning this. Thank you to all of you for listening. I hope that you all have a lovely holiday, and I will be seeing you again soon, hopefully for a new couple of chapters. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.